WCLN 1170 Radio and Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by JW Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
I want to thank you for being with us today. We Should Know is on there. We're coming to you here this week that's kind of between Christmas and New Year's, and we're talking with someone. When I mention her name to you, it's most likely maybe she needs to introduce me because everybody knows who she is. Sherry Matthews with Sampson Independent. Sherry, I want to thank you for taking time because I know your schedule is unbelievable for being with us today.
Oh, thank you, JW. I enjoy coming to see you and to be on We Should Know. I love the show.
Well, absolutely enjoy having you here. I've been looking back at some notes when I've had you on before, and I look at your experience level and I look at the places you've been, and I'm not sure folks really recognize that you've got over 35 years in journalism business. And the interesting part with me is that you've been a reporter, a managing editor, a city editor, general manager, publisher, all of those titles, and each one of these newspapers are local community newspapers.
Yes.
How did you get into that? Give us a sense of Sherry Matthews at the time when you were at UNCW Wilmington or wherever it was. All of a sudden you felt like this is something I want to do.
I'll be honest with you. It was 8th grade, Sampson Middle School. Cynthia Shell was my English teacher. I wrote something for her for the first time, and I told her, I said, I love this. She gave me an A. I don't know why, but she gave me an A. She told me I had some talent and I should pursue it. In 10th grade, Susan Nance at the time, now she's Susan Salter, at Clinton High School, was my English teacher. And she encouraged it. And from there, that's all I ever wanted to do was write. And for some reason, newspapers was the way I wanted to get the message across.
It's interesting because you and I have got so many mutual friends. You mentioned Susan.
Right.
I worked with Susan at the college for years. Just a great person, just a wonderful teacher, a very compassionate person. The drive to me in looking at the kinds of things you do, I don't know of really anybody that's more in touch with the pulse of the community. If you had to identify for us what the pulse of this community, and when I say this community, I know your reach goes beyond Sampson County, but for the community and surrounding communities, what would you say that pulse would feel like? What is your sense of that? Is it something that the richness, and I know you and I have talked about how giving the community is and those kinds of things, but just kind of give us a feel for what you feel for this community.
I love this community. There's no question. And if I had to say what the heartbeat was, it is the caring of individuals, whether it's a business, whether it's individuals, churches, organizations. You see it throughout Sampson County, whether you're in Turkey or Altreville, Plainview, or here in Clinton. People care about one another. They may not always agree, but when the chips are down, they'll roll their shirt sleeves up and help you in a minute. And that is absolutely amazing to me. It never ceases to happen either. I've never seen a time, no matter what's going on, when people weren't willing to help others.
I think that's an interesting observation, and of course it leads me to a kind of not necessarily a question, but an observation as well. Given what I wanted to kind of talk about today, which was reflection on 2020, as we sit here today, we're looking back now at 2020, January 2020, February 2020. For the most part, from my perspective, it seems that we've been gobbled up with this monster called COVID-19. Would not even identify that word until probably February of last year. Seemed like it's when it really started stirring, but there was some inkling in January. How has what you just described what has that impact been from your perspective on this community?
You know, COVID, you can look at it from several perspectives. COVID definitely changed us, changed how we do things. Yet that heartbeat remains and is stronger probably than ever. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that people aren't hurting, because there have been. People have lost jobs. Businesses have had to learn how to redo everything. But they've also come through it. I've watched people at shelters, food pantries, reach out and help folks. The folks over at Performance, for example, they always, through the Grateful Shed, they always are there to help the needy. You can look at any number of people and what they do. Look at STAR, what they've done with the broadband and what they've done with the hotspots to help the students. Everybody stood up and came through when it was needed.
When we look at that, the journalist part of you, that part that's seeking and looking for information, the thing that you're describing that comes through in your words about caring and giving and so forth, with the disaster, I call it a disaster. Most folks say pandemic. To me, it's kind of a disaster. But the pandemic itself has caused us to be even more threadbare, should I say, if that envisions the right perspective. How does that affect how you do your job, not only in reporting, but as a journalist? Do you have to dig deeper? Does it make it the path you walk on a little more sensitive? Is there things that a journalist sees? I know that we don't, but how does that change what you do?
COVID has changed us in a lot of ways. You have to dig deeper. You have to listen harder. Because in one respect, we're not seeing people eye to eye anymore in a lot of places. So you're doing telephone interviews, you're trying to reach people, and I can look at you and read you differently than I can if I'm talking to you on the telephone.
Absolutely. Or a Zoom presentation, that kind of thing. Absolutely.
It's a whole lot different, and so you've had to adjust to that. But beyond that, you know, Sampson County is a great county, but COVID has put people at odds in some respects. Mask wearing being one of those things.
Absolutely.
You know, there are people that feel very strongly about wearing them. Others feel very strongly not. But even in times like that, we've been able to get past that to the more important things. But you have to, as a newspaper, we've tried to take the stand that let's do what we can to help one another. And if mask wearing, if that's what people say, then that's what we should do. If that's what scientists say, if that's what our doctors say. And I'm going by the doctors in this community, Dr. Newton, Dr. Howerton, I can name them off one by one. If they tell me that's important and it'll help you and help me, then why not do it? So from a journalist standpoint, we've had to take stands that maybe weren't popular with everyone, but we felt like it was for the betterment of the community as a whole.
That theme of media and representation of what oftentimes we refer to historically as above the fold. I know you and I have talked about that before. If there's a story out there and it makes it above the fold on the newsstand, that's a big story.
Sure.
I wanted to kind of get a sense of how you've been able to maintain something other than the constant repetitive motion of COVID above the fold.
Right. It's hard. COVID, you can't ignore it. What we have tried to do with COVID is just stick straight to the facts. Just what the health department's numbers report. We tried not to editorialize that in any way. But then what we've looked for is the positives, because COVID is not going away yet. So if you want something above the fold besides COVID, you have to look into your community and see what's going on, not just the wrecks and the shootings and those kind of things, but the other things that we value as a community. Mr. Esther King
Absolutely.
would be a classic example. He was above the fold back in May when they had the big drive-through then, and he was just above the fold this week at his passing. And he was a big part of our community.
That's an interesting piece, and the piece you did on him in both occasions, I think represents somebody that we hold high as we honor our military, and there's nobody that does that more than Ann Knowles, in my opinion, as veterans officer.
Very true.
But when I look at that and I look at this guy, and I think, you know, to some degree, folks could drive by where he lived and say, well, he's been somewhat marginalized. But to the newspaper and to local journalism, you're able to see beyond just the shell, that there's something deeper there. And I think the way you portrayed that was a great above-the-fold event in both of those paper observations.
You know, that's what's so unique about community news. Community news, you can look deeper at a subject like Mr. King. You can look beyond his house and to the way he impacted with the community, the things he did. Highly important. And you can bring to life on the page somebody that might otherwise have been overlooked and should never have been overlooked. Such an amazing man.
And I think the interesting part of that is you get to look at and have time to process. Again, as you read, I'm one of these people that likes to pick up stuff and read it. I use a lot of the media platforms, but still I like to pick it up and read it. And I think the newspaper brings that to us. It makes us feel the story as we see the story, if that makes any sense.
It does. When you're writing, you can bring a reader into it. It's very important.
We're going to take our first break, and when we come back, I want to kind of dig a little bit deeper with Sherry Matthews and the Sampson Independent and your role there.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us. We're talking with Sherry Matthews today. I think I've got her title. She's got so many. She's the publisher, editor. She's kind of the go-to person at the Sampson Independent to make things happen. We'll be back in a moment.
Experiencing slow internet? If you have a fast internet package, the problem is most likely your wireless router. With more devices using Wi-Fi, your wireless router may not be able to deliver the speed and coverage you need. We now have the leading solution to enhance your internet experience. Using small devices in a mesh network, these Wi-Fi appliances cover just about any size home so that all your devices can operate to their fullest potential. Whole home Wi-Fi from Star Communications. Get the most out of your internet connection.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know is on there. JW Simmons is my name. I am your host, and we're talking with Sherry Matthews. Sherry, thank you for being with us today. I've given you in the first segment multiple titles. You're now the publisher, editor of the Sampson Independent.
Well,
is that correct?
Basically, publisher, general manager.
Publisher, general manager.
I gave Chris Brent the title of editor.
He needs that. Chris
He does.
needs that. He does a great job.
He's a good guy.
So when I look at your career, you've been, like you were up in Wilson.
Yes.
And you worked there.
I did.
You've been in multiple locations, even out of state. I believe in South Carolina.
South Carolina,
South
yes.
Carolina. So you got not only a sense for this area, but for the general region of the United States in that sense. I want to kind of segue in. One of the things I wanted to talk about was some of the things that has occurred in the past year, 2020,
Right.
given the fact we're sitting here now the 29th when this is airing, and there's a lot going on. But one of the things that stood out, you've done, I don't know how many, but I looked at a lot of editorials you've done. But one of them that stuck out to me, and I mentioned this to you off air, was one you did back in April. And it's something I think a lot of folks can relate to. The title of that is, Are Empty Sanctuaries a Wake-Up Call from God? The way you contexted that, because you contexted it in such a way that it was personal for you, where you were at the time that this came to you to write this. You were in your, quote, church, should I say, in Warsaw, that seats probably, what, 200 to 400 people?
About 450.
About 450 people, which is a huge church by rural standards, a huge church. So, but the way you context it, talk to us about that editorial, if you will, and just kind of tell us what you were feeling, because it really has touched, I think, a lot of people. Because that question, the posing the editorial with a question mark, was, I think, what got people's attention. And then the way you put it forth in the year of a pandemic.
You know, I was sitting in church that day, JW, and I call it a God thing. You hear that a lot, but I really believe that, because the church was empty, and the realization that COVID brought, because churches had to stop in-person worship, we found ways around that. But looking in that sanctuary that day was so quiet, so still, and nobody there, 4 people in the whole building. And I thought, is this what's going to be in the future? You know, and also thought maybe God was trying to give us a signal. Look, you got to prioritize church. So many of us, myself included from time to time, had gotten to a point where church was where we went when we didn't have anything else going on. And all of a sudden, our sanctuaries were not as full as they used to be. And on Sunday mornings, even though this was an unusual day, a lot of times there might not be 60 people in a sanctuary that holds 450. And I think, how did that happen? What happened? And is God trying to tell us maybe we need to make church more of a priority so that we'll fill these sanctuaries again? You know, is that what we need to be doing? And maybe we'll appreciate church more now that we've been told we can't go or we shouldn't go. And you know, it was just a scary feeling to me, because church, for me and for a lot of people, a lot of your viewers, is very important. It's our foundation. And I think we need to look at the priorities of our lives, and I think church and our faith needs to be top among them.
I think that you just nailed it when it comes to that part of that editorial that got a lot of people's attention. It brought out that question, do we look at our faith and our structural worship place as some kind of necessary convenience? I think you cause people, and for folks that hadn't read that, they can pull it up online, go to the Sampson Independent website, they can pull it up. But it was in April 10th. But when people looked at that, I think a lot of folks thought, well, I need to re-examine me instead of re-examining everything around me and look at what's going on and say, wait a minute, if it comes to that, and for all of us, at some point in time in our existence, it's going to come to that. Am I ready for that? Does that statement even make sense? If it comes to that, meaning just me and God, am I ready for that? And that's what, to me, struck me as I read that editorial. It just struck me as, maybe back up and look at you. How many of these other things? And I'm all, you know, for children being in sports and all that kind of thing. But at the same time, what is our first priority?
And I agree with that. And it spoke to me personally. And I really felt like I was moved to write this because I felt like maybe it could make a small difference for somebody. Maybe somebody would think about it and go, you know, maybe I do need to go to church first. And then do whatever needs to be done in the afternoons. I mean, we're really quick to call on God when we need God, but we're not quite as quick to give back when it's time to give back. We always think church is always going to be here. Well, COVID showed us that church can be here, but that fellowship, all those things that church brings, the communal worship, was gone. And it was going to be taken from us, or could it be taken from us? And did we care? I mean, was it really, did it matter? It did to me.
But it's such a thought-provoking idea, and there's some relevance to Scripture as we think about some of the predictions in Scripture
Sure.
about folks being, brought away from that standard of faith and that belief platform, and at some point in time in the future, are we going to be moved away from or shamed by or not going or not attending? So it draws a parallel between understanding our faith and our commitment to scientific research and who we are.
Right.
It really causes us to question, do we have the strength to get through where we're going, wherever that may be?
That's true, and that's very deep and
It
very
is,
true.
it
It's
is.
very thought-provoking. And, church during COVID, there was nobody at my church and probably your church who wanted to have worship like we'd had and maybe cause somebody to get sick. I'd read too many times where church choirs, where COVID was causing people to die because they were infected at choir meetings or so forth. But yet, you had to be able to realize what maybe was the underlying message we were getting from this, that maybe it needed to be more important to us. I mean, I saw people get up in arms about it, but my first question is, were you in church before? Is this really an issue, or are you making an issue for some other reason?
Yeah, to me, what this did, what the article did for me was, again, back to that necessary convenience thing. Was it a calling that caused me to rethink what I was or was not doing? Of course, I've been there, but the reality is, I'm wondering if other people felt the same thing. Did it cause you to think about what you were doing and what might you do different? But it is a platform to start thinking from, which spun in my cerebral up here, is that I see all these people that have COVID that maybe are in hospitals or in particular areas that might be on ventilators or whatever, and their loved ones standing outside the hospital looking at a window because they can't get to them. So all of a sudden, the isolation part strikes me as part of that article as well.
Sure.
Are we all of a sudden isolating ourselves unnecessarily?
That's true.
Which is somewhat scary.
It is scary. It's very scary. And another thing about being able to write that is, we talked about this off air too, at a community newspaper.
Exactly.
I can express that kind of opinion and share faith messages far more than you can at, say, the New York Times.
I would say even more in the sense, also share in the sense of regionalism as it relates to TV news and media and that kind of thing. They cannot, and I'm going to say this with some sense of understanding that I'm not speaking for anybody, but it just seems to me they're not able to do that as a local journalist can, simply because they're not feeding the mass. They're trying to isolate. They're trying to say, I want to make sure I don't have any small part of the organization object.
Right.
Do you sense that sometimes?
I sense that a lot. And I'll say this too. I'm very fortunate. You talk about my years in journalism. I started when I was 10, by the way.
Yeah. 35 years. You had to start 8 or 10.
At least, But the thing about it is, it offers you an opportunity. The community, thankfully, they know me. Those type pieces are not meant to be judgmental in any way.
Absolutely.
If anything, they're more introspective than anything else.
Well, they're thought-provoking in that sense, is what they cause us to think.
Yeah.
And if there's one thing that I think the media and that you do well, is oftentimes cause us to think, not create conflict, but think about it.
Well, thank you. That is the goal.
Yeah.
Maybe not always do we get that across, but that is the goal. It's not, the editorial page is not meant in that judgmental sense so much as it is to make people think beyond social media, to look at it, at any subject, and just think about this opinion versus this opinion, and make your mind up for yourself.
We're going to take another break, and we're going to come back, and I got a piece here I want for you to share in our discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with Sherry Matthews, Sampson Independent. We'll be back in a moment. Stay tuned. Call a friend. Thank you. Enjoy the second half.
Many things have been stolen away during this time of uncertainty. No crowds to cheer on their favorite teams. Applause and pageantry have been stripped away. Thieves are looking to make your home empty and silent. Star Communications has the answer you are looking for. Security by Star. Automation and affordability along with friendly service makes for a security choice that is sure to keep your family cheering.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We're kind of halfway the show here. The name of the show is We Should Know. I'm JW Simmons, your host. Just talking over the past few times, I've mentioned the fact we're a bit over 10 years doing this show. I want to thank you for your comments and commentary. The email address is weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. That's weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. Your comments, suggestions about things we need to talk about, guests you wish we would have, subjects that people would like to hear about. We're happy to offer that convenience and I'm happy to discuss that and if possible get those folks on. We would also remind you that we come to you from Star Communications, Channel 16. That's cable TV, Channel 16. Each and every week we air at 2:30. It's simulcast on WCLN Radio. There's also a replay Tuesday, Thursday at 7 p.m. We have over the past few months and probably a year or so now been uploading everything to social media platforms, Facebook, all of those other things that YouTube that oftentimes folks tell me they have seen the show on. So that's there as well in case you happen to miss us at those particular times. Again, if you need to send us a card, their location for that is Post Office Box 1482, Clinton, North Carolina, 28328. We Should Know at Post Office Box 1482, Clinton, North Carolina. Again, thank you for being with us today. We're talking with Sherry Matthews, the editor, the publisher, and again, I keep forgetting all those titles, but Sherry, 35 plus years
Long time.
that you're doing this and you've been involved in it. I've just touched on a little bit of stuff you've been doing. One of the things that we've talked to you about before that struck a bell with me, and I want to kind of get into that a little bit in this segment because not only are we looking back at 2020, but we're looking at something that you started some time ago. And that particular subject, I think, is just so interesting because we just got through talking about your relationship with the church. You wrote a book called Hymn of Commitment. Correct. Or should I say you're writing a book. You're continuing that process. But immediately, once you got into that and once we talked about that horrific kind of event that happened right here in a church in Clinton, you also co-produced a movie related to the same thing. And sometimes I mention that to folks, they'll go, really? And I'm going, well, we had it on my show, everybody ought to know. You know, or it's been to Sampson Independent, everybody ought to know. But it's still, we need to mention that again. Same question that I asked you in the beginning of the show. Why this book? What intrigued you about that particular, and I use that word horrific events because it was a murder. It was. It was a plotted. Mm-hmm. It was a well-designed, if you're a murderer, I guess, that put that together. What intrigued you to write the book, to move it to production? And where is it? Where is it now?
I've been intrigued by it since it happened. I was not here when the murder actually occurred. That was in 1984, I believe 84. It was. Mm-hmm. And so I was away. When the trial happened, I was working in Wilson, mm-hmm. and I was a crime reporter. Mm-hmm. So all things crime fascinated me. Mm-hmm. And
still do, by the way.
Still do.
I'll say that for you.
Yeah, exactly. It still fascinates me.
Yeah.
And so I took a week off work and came back home, stayed with Mom and Dad, and went to the trial because it was just so fascinating. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'd never seen anything like it. Not only was the trial itself fascinating, but all the people that came. Mm-hmm. When you go in the courthouse, people would have their names on the benches, so you couldn't take their seat.
About 200 or so folks would show up for this
mm-hmm.
thing.
They'd line up outside.
But we're talking here, for those folks that just forgive them a point of reflection, we're talking about a church right here in Clinton that's Emmanuel
Baptist.
Emmanuel Baptist, and that's a pretty good sized congregation, and it just showed how much it affected and impacted this community, which gets back to that idea of journalism and how it impacts the community.
And that church, and I'm sorry to say, was divided over this murder and over the accused, Donna Arnold.
Yeah.
And it was a real sad time, and it was also an amazing time because it drew people from all across the country and really outside of the country. I understand that people from Australia and England came here to see this trial. But what really turned me into wanting to do something was the newspaper. When I came here to work, I interviewed Dana Arnold, the oldest daughter of the Arnold children. Carl Stuffle, who had been arrested and actually was serving time, was about to get out on parole. And I managed to get in touch with Dana. She was in her 20s. And we did a 7-part series on her memories of that murder. She was 6 at the time.
Give us the overall, just for folks that are listening that might not know about this murder. Give us the overall context of what happened. We're talking about a church person that resulted in the murder of an individual, and the actual body was found in the yard or the church property there. Give us kind of a context of what, so people can envision what you're...
Dan Arnold was the minister of music at Emmanuel. His wife, Donna, was the organist. They had been here a little over a year, and they took in I guess a juvenile delinquent would probably be the best way to describe it. And there was a tryst with both Mrs. Arnold and the juvenile delinquent. He was 18. And there was also, yes, a young man. There was also a tryst between Mr. Arnold and the young man, unbeknownst to either one of them. And then the plot to kill Dan came about. He had a life insurance policy. The wife plotted, according to court records, with this young man to kill him. And the plot was basically, after Wednesday night prayer meeting, I'll leave my pocketbook at the organ. I'll send Dan back to get it, and you and your accomplice be waiting in the bushes and take care of him. And basically that's what happened. And
this was something that was laid out early on when this young man showed up.
Yes.
Because that relationship, that kind of contaminated three-way relationship started happening. So somebody had to exit the three-way relationship, and it ended up being her husband.
It ended up being the husband. Yeah, he had to exit. He brought him into the home. He met him in Raleigh and brought him back here. So he
through faith though. His idea, from what I recall, he was really genuinely concerned to try to help this young man.
He was. And in many ways, I believe he genuinely was. He wanted to help him. He was going to try to turn his life around. He got him a job here. He was trying to do things for him, but other underlying issues happened. And the plot happened as it was. The children were involved because Mrs. Arnold, and this again is through court testimony, put the children in the car, carried them back to the church where they found their father lying on the church lawn, murdered.
The context of the murder itself, give us a sense of time, how it unfolded. We're talking weeks, months for this plot to occur, and then for the plot to result in murder?
We're talking months.
So this was something that evolved. It was not like all of a sudden I just, instantaneously decided to do this. This was serious, premeditated murder.
Oh, sure it was. They had been living together in this family unit. They, like I said, neither the husband nor the wife knew the other was having an affair with this young man. They did not know that. But Mrs. Arnold wanted out of her relationship. The more she became involved with Mr. Stuffle, the more she wanted out of the relationship.
What was the age difference with Stuffle?
Donna was 31 and Carl was 18.
And I think part of that gets into that psychological kind of thing of for the 18 being empowered by, I mean, we could hypothetically talk about this.
Sure.
It's not a factual thing, but being empowered by this older woman that was interested in him, and the reverse on her part. Here's this young man that still sees me as somebody that's extremely interesting, and the way you played that out in the beginning and the understanding with your text in the book was interesting as well. I think that
Carl, you know, he came from a broken home. Donna was like a mother figure to him. I think he loved the children. I think he felt like he was going to have a ready-made family that he never had. And let's remember, he wasn't very stable either. And then Donna, she had been not physically abused, but verbally abused, mentally abused, and needed some attention. And that's how this all occurred. So it was sad in many ways. It was strangest love triangle I've ever read about, particularly for the 80s. But talking to Dana, she talked me through all this, and she was the inspiration for the book because she had so many uncanny memories.
we're going to need to take a break.
Okay.
I want to pause it right there, but when we come back, I want to kind of pose this as kind of a lead-in when we come back. Kind of get us inside the head of Dana, because I know if you talk to her, you got in her head.
Oh, yeah.
So get us inside the head of Dana and help us understand, because what she was doing was really exploding a very structured, faith-based family, and she was part of that exploding of that. So we'll cover that when we get back. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our last break. We're coming to you from WCLN, Star Communications, Channel 16. We're talking with Sherry Matthews. A lot to talk about. Stay tuned, call a friend. We'll be right back.
To get the most out of your electronic devices, you need a strong internet connection and a protected home Wi-Fi network. You need high-speed internet from Star. Star has the fastest, most affordable high-speed internet service available for all your devices. We have no long-term contracts or high-pressure sales. Our service speaks for itself, and switching is hassle-free. We take care of everything with free installation from a local company. High-speed internet from Star. Internet at the speed of life.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Well, thank you for being with us today. We're talking with Sherry Matthews. Sherry, everybody knows the name. Everybody knows what you do at the Sampson Independent. You run the place. You make people aware of what's going on in the community. You're a local journalist throughout the eastern part of the United States. Over 35 years. I keep looking at that number and it can't be right, but you know, time goes by fast. As we went off, I want to pick up where we left. We were talking about a book that you are working on to complete. It's been turned into a movie, but we're talking about right here in Clinton, Emmanuel Church. We're talking about a murder that occurred. We're talking about a love triangle, give or take. That may not be the correct word, love triangle, but it was a triangle that occurred between a man, his wife, and a third party, and the children were involved. Pick us up with the female, Dana, that was involved in your conversation with her. What was going on in her head at the time that she went along, and was she the catalyst to this murder that happened in 1984? Was she the catalyst, or was the 18-year-old young man the catalyst for the murder?
Okay, and that would be Donna.
Donna, excuse me,
Dana's
Donna, yeah.
the daughter, but Donna, in my mind.
Yeah,
and
Donna.
I went to see Carl after he finally got out of prison. And I talked with him for about an hour and a half. And I walked away from him feeling sorry for him to some degree. And that seems strange.
Yeah, that's an interesting emotion given what he actually was convicted of.
He was a young boy. He was 18. He did not have a good family background. Donna, in my mind, she was looking a way out, and he was it. And I think she used him, in my mind, to get what she wanted. Mm-hmm. Now, he's guilty, and he should have served time for what he did, mm-hmm. but she was never made to pay. She spent less than 2 years in prison, got out on technicality, has never admitted that she had any part in it, not even to her children.
Wow. But clearly she must have, given the framework of what you just laid out, that she actually was part of the scheme for him to go back to the church, leaving her pocketbook there.
Leaving her pocketbook. They had letters. The district attorney's office had letters which were presented in court that she wrote, that the handwriting analysis said was her handwriting, which said, I can't wait for our some days to begin, mm-hmm. can't wait for Wednesday night to get here. And she said, that's my handwriting, but I didn't write that. Very odd. Very,
do you recall what she was actually convicted of?
Second-degree murder.
Wow.
But it was overturned. Conspiracy to commit murder.
I mean, it was just in a lay point of view, that would seem to be an obvious thing that would, impale a rather long sentence, but only 2 years.
2 years, and she got out. She moved away. She got her children back. The girls, Dana, the oldest, mm-hmm.
is
the one that fought Carl getting out of prison, mm-hmm. has told me many times, I had the rights to her story. That's mm-hmm. how the movie came about, and the book. Yeah. But she's told me on many occasions she's begged her mother to tell them the truth. Mm-hmm. And her mother refuses to talk about it.
Which basically, the obvious question is that now it's been turned into a movie and that you co-produced. Mm-hmm. So tell us how you got, I guess, from journalist to being in the movie business.
That's an unusual story, but it really started with Dana. Mm-hmm.
Now this is the daughter of Donna.
This is the daughter of Donna and Dan Arnold. And it started by my wanting to tell her story. And that 7-part series we did in the paper. Mm-hmm. Such a fascinating story. We were interviewed several times on some of these 48 hours mystery type movie series about it because it was such a fascinating murder. And I said, well, maybe we need to turn this into a book. So she gave me the rights to her story. I started interviewing her more in depth. Mm-hmm. I flew to Tennessee and met a friend of mine who was in California, but who had been here for the entire trial. Mm-hmm. Her name was Pam Hyatt. Mm-hmm. She graduated from Lakewood High School. She had all the court transcripts. Wow. So I flew to Tennessee, met her, and brought all the court transcripts back. That in itself took a year just to go through all the transcripts.
I can imagine.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Even if you've never written it, just reading the transcripts was fascinating.
Yeah.
But anyway, I was fortunate to be introduced to some folks in New York who wanted to publish the book. And as we were working on the book, they decided to take, it was called The Story Plant. Mm-hmm. And they had a second company called Studio Digital. And what they were doing were they were taking their books and turning that material into content, either Broadway plays, movies, musicals, mm-hmm, those kind of mm-hmm. things. And they called me and said, your story is so fascinating, we'd like to make it our first movie. So long story short, we raised the money locally. Mm-hmm. They came here, we filmed in 18 days. We have a movie that was on Amazon Prime and on Hulu.
So you can still go there and find it.
I have DVDs of it right now.
Yeah, but somebody could go on their TV now and go to Amazon
mm-hmm.
and find it.
And Google Tarnished Notes.
Okay.
I have the DVD. I just got all the rights back to the movie from the Story Plant.
Yeah.
And I'm looking now to sell it.
Wow. I mean, that's amazing. So I know I'm going to be asked this because they'll be calling and emailing and saying, where do I see it? What do I do? So somebody goes to Amazon or some of the
Right now, it's not on Amazon. We had to take it down when I bought it back.
Do you see that when that might?
We're going to get it back up probably in the spring.
So you'll let us know
Yes.
via the Sampson Independent, and we can announce it here when it's back, because that's going to be intriguing for people.
We have some DVDs, if anybody that wants a DVD, and we're really trying to get this sold on a larger scale, Netflix, somewhere like that. But
well, I could even see Sherry just listening, and as we're talking about this today, and trust me, a lot of people, not just around here, is going to hear this. Somebody's probably going to call you and say, "Can we do a remake? What do you think?" I'm just throwing that out there.
Hey.
You know, a remake is like, we want to take what you've got, look at it, refresh it, bring in a whole different cast, and do a remake on it.
And we could do it in an instant.
Because you've got the framework in place.
I have the raw footage. We could do anything we wanted to with it. I guess the best thing about the movie, JW, from my perspective, was we took and put all the money we raised back into this community.
Wonderful, wonderful.
We ate here, slept here, everything we did was here.
And there was a lot of on-site stuff.
Oh, yes.
I know I've spent way too much time on this. This is the thing I want to get you back, and we'll just do a whole show.
Oh, yeah, it's fascinating.
But this is a fascinating piece, but it's important for us to mention that because they need, our folks, us, we need to know more about this because it does affect us. Sometimes we look at these things, as you mentioned, on 48 hours or whatever, 60 minutes, and we don't say how it really affects us. But this is right here. This is next door stuff.
Happened right
and there's
here.
probably folks, I'm probably going to get some emails or text or something for some folks that go to Emmanuel Church and say, well, you ought to do this, and why, but it's a real part of the community.
It is, and I'll be honest with you, Emmanuel, the piece about Emmanuel, they're a great group over there.
Oh,
and
wonderful faith-based
they
organization.
didn't deserve any of
uh-uh.
that, and it had nothing to do with them.
Yeah.
And everything we did, or what I tried to do, was not to taint the church.
Sure.
Because I just did not want that to happen, because they didn't deserve that. They didn't ask for it, didn't deserve it.
We're coming up on about 2 minutes out from finishing today.
I can't believe it's going that quickly.
It always does when you and I are talking. It goes fast. That's just the nature of it. But I wanted to kind of give you an opportunity, if there's anything that you wanted to mention that occurred in 2020, that obviously we've missed a lot, but if there was any particular things you wanted to touch on.
Just briefly, just to remind folks that even during COVID, there have been a lot of good things that have happened. You can look at Turkey, for example. 2 new businesses.
That's right.
In Turkey this year. Like I was mentioning, I just read where Senator Jackson has got some approvals for expansion of broadband through STAR.
Yep.
That's amazing.
Absolutely.
And most needed. Despite COVID, our restaurants seem to be moving along pretty well and surviving, and we keep encouraging, please, shop local, eat local. Help our folks as much as you can. And of course, just in general, all the people that have reached out to help other people. That's important. And when you look at 2020, you can look at what COVID did to us, but I think it strengthened us as a community in many ways. And hopefully it made us think about what's priority.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It does, and I think to that point, I look back and I think about, we had a microburst down at Union School. We had regional media here with cameras talking about it.
Oh, yeah.
And how blessed we are that we didn't have more lives lost at events like that.
That's exactly
and so
right.
when we think about it, and I look at what you do each and every day, we just want to say to you, we appreciate what you do, and thank you for being part of this community.
Thank you for having me here today, and I'm just blessed to be a part of the community.
Well, you always have a seat in our studio anytime, Sherry, and we welcome you back.
Appreciate
it. And I kind of consider you as somewhat of a guiding star around here.
Oh, you're my kind. Thank you.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking with Sherry Matthews. I want to kind of give you a little bit of background on where we're going. This show is airing the 29th, which is kind of between that that year of 2020 and looking at 2021. On January 5, you'll be listening to a few folks via Zoom with some of their observations and potential projections for 2021. So we look forward to seeing you again next week on We Should Know. Stay in touch, stay tuned, and as always, we look directly in that camera and say, may God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host JW Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.